Here are my top 7 tips when making a high detail Ikonart stencil. But first we need to get our artwork, and we're going to get that file from Artsy Fartsy Mama and then just go to Tutorials Ikonart, and in her latest tutorial she has this free Nevermore design available. So I just clicked on the design and I'll print right out of my browser here. So I just click the print button and make sure my printer is selected and look through all my settings to make sure they're correct. I want to make sure it's printing at 100% scale. And then click where it says print using system dialog section, and then you can go into your actual printer settings. So you always want to adjust your printer settings. It's super important. Here's how I adjust mine for my Canon Pixma IX6820. I just select my high quality paper and go into my custom settings to print as fine as possible, adjust my contrast and my brightness to be as dark as possible, and select grayscale. So those are the settings I use every single time. Each printer is going to look a little bit different, but you basically want to just be printing as high quality as possible so that you are laying down as much ink as possible when printing, and this is going to make your prints nice and dark so that during exposure the light doesn't get through it. And here's a side-by-side comparison. Here I did not adjust my print settings. You can see the lines in the very little text has all little dots everywhere. It doesn't look the greatest compared to when I do adjust my settings. The ink looks nice and dark and solid and not see-through. This is super important when making your stencils, so always adjust those settings. All right, so after you're done printing, you are ready to expose. And one step you definitely don't want to skip. This is important when you're making any stencil, but it's especially important when you are making a high detail stencil. You want to take that cover sheet and rub down really, really well. You do not want any gaps between your artwork and the stencil. This can cause undercutting. Undercutting is when light gets underneath your artwork edges, and it can happen with any artwork, but it's especially noticeable when you have fine lines or high details. Another thing we have found that helps some people when making high detailed stencils is to expose 5 seconds less than the recommended time. So I'm using inkjet film. Normally I would expose for 35 seconds, but today I'm going to expose for 30 seconds. We don't recommend going much more than 5 seconds less because it can cause problems during washout and make your stencil a lot weaker, but you can do 5 seconds less. Definitely never expose for longer than the recommended time. That's just giving the light even more chance to get through your artwork and harden the stencil underneath, so we do not recommend that. So after your stencil is exposed, you want to continue to protect it from the light until it is completely washed out. So I'm just using these 2 pieces of cardboard, but you can use a folder or anything. If you need to take it from your exposure light to your sink and you're going past a bright window or UV lighting of some sort, protect that stencil. Otherwise, the areas that you are wanting to wash out can continue to harden. So after exposure, you are ready to wash out your stencil, and we do recommend soaking your stencil in a little bit of warm water for 1 minute. We recommend this step anytime you make a stencil, but especially when you're making a high detail stencil. It's going to help soften the emulsion and make washout a whole lot faster and a whole lot easier. And as you can see, I'm still protecting my stencil from the light during the soaking process using the clipboard. So I don't want any light to hit my stencil again until it's completely washed out. So soak your stencil for about a minute. We don't recommend going too much longer than that, as it can weaken the stencil and cause you to wash away parts of the stencil that you don't actually want to wash away, especially in a high detail stencil. So soak it for a little while, but not too long. All right, so now that this stencil has been soaked for about a minute, we are ready for the washout process. So the washout process for a high detail stencil isn't all that different than the washout process for any stencil. One thing I will say is that you want to keep the nozzle moving. You don't want to hyper focus on one area because that can cause blow-offs. When you have a high detail stencil, there's not as much surface area protecting your design. So the design is balancing on the crisscross lines of the mesh. So blow-offs during washout can happen a lot easier with a high detail design or fine lines than it would with a design that has very thick lines or a design. Other than that, you just want to use warm water and good pressure, and of course we don't recommend being in front of a bright window. If your washout area does have a lot of natural light or UV light coming in, then we just recommend washing out at night. So those are our top 7 tips for washing out a high detail stencil. I'll have some additional links below with more resources, but let us know in the comments if you have any questions, and click the subscribe button so you get notified every time we upload.